Hello, and welcome to a new episode of TEQ. Today, we're going to talk about algorithm and ethics in AI and bias in AI. And I am your host, Carolina Milanesi. And you heard me before talk about how absolutely paramount it is to think about responsible creation and adoption of AI. And I think that as we are at the beginning of a new era of generative AI, not just AI, this need becomes even more important. And today I am at reInvent, so you see that the set is a bit different than what I normally have. And I have with me the best possible person to talk about that. And is with great pleasure that I welcome to the conversation Dia Nguyen, who is the responsible AI lead for AWS. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me today.
And I think I'm going to start with not an easy question for you, which is really about how do we strike the balance between advancing AI technology and ensuring responsible, ethical use and also creation of the tools that we're using?
Yeah, that's a very important question, right? You said you're not starting off with an easy one, but it's one that I talk a lot about because there is such great opportunity that we have with AI when we see it having the ability to be able to address problems and challenges that were previously unattainable or unsolvable. Yeah. And we want the benefit of being able to leverage the technology to be able to do some of those things, right? Like tackle areas of climate change and look for new approaches to handle diseases and cancers that have been unsolvable. So those are some of the really cool and interesting and exciting opportunities in innovation with AI. But we have to do this in responsible ways, as you mentioned. It's paramount for us to build, design, implement, and use AI responsibly. And that balance is important. And so I think what do we need to do? How do we tackle that is thinking about AI and responsible AI holistically, not just relegating it to something that's a technology solution alone, but recognizing that, you know, in our organizations and businesses that are building AI-driven products, that they have to build a culture of responsibility, and that it involves everyone within the organization. But also then thinking about what are the specific things that we need to do with our people, what new processes we need to enact or enable in the organization, what are the technology tools that we need to bring to bear for perhaps, you know, detecting bias and addressing areas of privacy, right? All of that has to be part of the solution when we think about this balance. And then the other thing that I would say is that we also have to think about this in terms of incorporating all entities, right? That this is something that involves, you know, public and private sector, government, academia, all of us coming together, and even us as individual consumers to demand, desire, like want to see responsible use, ethical use of AI, you know, implemented in the world. And so it takes both of those, right? Yeah. The work of the corporation and businesses that are buying AI technologies or building AI-driven products, as well as all of these other sort of entities to help drive towards the kinds of guardrails and controls, as well as the research that's necessary to continue to advance this responsible use of the technology.
And there's still people out there that are wondering why responsible AI matters, and I always bring them back to, well, we need to make sure that we safeguard human values, right? That we ensure fairness, and to your point about bias, and in all of that, we build trust. Yes. for the technology itself, and then for the organizations. With generative AI, I'm kind of curious if obviously bias and explainability has always been of importance for AI, but with generative AI specifically, there are other factors like hallucinations and toxicity that come into play when you're building a model. are there more specific challenges to generative AI?
Absolutely. So I loved, and I just want to go back to something you said just for a moment, and you talked about trust. And I've said this a number of times, and people probably who have heard me before will have remembered this as well. I say that responsible AI is the foundation of that trust.
Yeah.
And there's a trickle-down effect, right? So with one company or one entity building AI responsibly, and then using and them then providing that for their customers, and this sort of trust that is earned with their customers has a trickle-down effect to the technology as you described, but the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And the same is going to be true with like our government officials and others. And so it is important, right, that we build in ways that will engender trust. Now, as you mentioned with generative AI, right, the sort of challenges are a bit exacerbated, especially because we now go from being able to sort of this specific and defined set of problems that traditional ML might have been looking to solve or predict, to now these open-ended type considerations and generating content and information. So yes, toxicity is one, right, that you described, and being able to contain unintended or harmful verbiage. And that's challenging because, there was an example of an organization wanting to limit certain texts or certain verbiage, but in a research context, it might be appropriate to have information about, certain folks that, or individuals, right, that may have done harmful things, but it would be useful to have that information in certain contexts. So how easy is it now to be able to limit that when you're talking about potentially all types of uses that you may not have understood?
Yeah.
And I think that complexity of the open nature also comes into play when we think about, how we define fairness, right? Or how we define what is fair. It's easier, I wouldn't say easy, but it's easier to do that perhaps when we were talking about, a loan application and understanding how we might lend. But then, we're now using this application in education, and we're using it in a number of other places. And so that becomes, increasingly complex. And then we go from, issues of privacy and making sure that we, contain information about individuals or entities and can protect that, to now questions of copying and whether, the foundation or the basis of the training data that is being used in generative AI is now being used in other ways to generate content. And is this mine or my intellectual property? And those kinds of considerations are now, greater, right? There's more for us to pay attention to and be much more intentional about how we're designing those systems and the ways in which we are defining or implementing responsible practices to be able to limit, right, the scope of impact or negative impact.
Yeah, and there's a lot of learning still that, not from a technology perspective, but really from an implementation perspective, we need to still go through. You're talking about copying, and, that's an ethical decision that I, as a user, have to make, right? If I'm thinking about school, for instance, and I can tell you that my teenagers is all over shortcuts and whatnot. So I think that the same is true for organizations. And I know that this week you have brought to market new solutions for your customers who are learning to put their own guardrails and train their model in an ethical way. Can you talk to me a little bit more about this?
Right. So, in addition to SageMaker Clarify that folks may have remembered us talking about in the past that helps to detect bias in the data and in the algorithms, we also have a new service called Bedrock Guardrails, which is actually providing capability in our, generative product to help customers apply some specific safeguards, based on their specific use cases, and that's important again, so that we have a little bit more context. Right?
Yeah.
So and the customer has those controls now with the Bedrock Guardrails. We also released in preview SageMaker Clarify, a product that was allowing it to evaluate foundation models based on specific criteria for quality and safety. And then I'm excited about this because this, talks about like our step into providing transparency for our customers. Last reInvent, we released service cards, and I was a part of some of that initial work with a customer of mine that was making certain demands, and we created service cards as an iterative way or more consistent way to be able to provide information about our services. And so we're releasing service cards, additional service cards this reInvent as well, right? So there'll be 5 other service cards that are being released that give people context for its limitations of the service, its intended use, ways in which they can apply specific best practices for their use case. And again, that's us providing a degree of transparency into the service, but also provides the foundation for our customers to be able to build upon. And then the other, I think, that is important is around watermarking. And so we've introduced watermarks into our image generation with our Amazon Titan image. And so this was, in line with being able to, the Titan image generator, being able to provide customers the ability to provide those enhanced quality images, but also have them watermarked in context for where they were created.
Yeah, because I think that you mentioned IP before, and I think that is so critical to the whole Gen AI rollout, because it's not just the data, and you can think about imagery as data, right?
Yeah.
And by thinking about not just artists and creators, but within organization, there's a lot of proprietary, imagery that you have that you want to safeguard. So
Right,
yeah, that's absolutely critical. I'm curious, everybody's talking about, well, a lot of people are talking about ethical considerations when it comes to AI, but I wonder if you think that as an industry, we are focusing on the right things or not.
Yeah. So, it's interesting, and I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of customers, with the work that we started a few years ago, customer-facing, engagement on responsible AI. And I'm actually excited about this period that we're in, specifically around generative, because I think that while people had this context and understanding for the value and importance of responsible AI, perhaps it wasn't as front of mind, right? And even some recent research that was done that we commissioned said that only 25% of companies that understood were actually implementing responsible AI, right? And so I certainly believe that we could say that perhaps they were not focusing enough. But with generative AI, I think we're seeing a little bit of two things. One is companies are eager, right, and excited about the technology and wanting to, as many have talked about this AI race, wanting to be, first to the draw or advance, early in their adoption of generative AI, perhaps not taking as much of the intentional focus that's needed to put in place all the practices, et cetera. But I think what has happened, over the last several months, in us seeing ChatGPT and other applications in the forefront, that has increased people's awareness of some of the challenges. So there is this, sort of groundswell of interest and groundswell of, awareness now that I think is absolutely useful for us to get the right momentum and now action.
Yeah, and I think that with that comes greater accountability, because I don't remember, and I've been covering tech for a long time, more than I want to actually disclose, but I don't remember.
I can't believe that.
I don't remember a technology that so quickly became so consumerized in a way where everybody, even people that are not in tech, have heard of ChatGPT, have played with it. And I think that, to your point, that greater awareness will raise questions from normal people that are using.
It absolutely has. And we're seeing this, right, whether you're in education or if you're in healthcare, other areas of sort of commercial, business and enterprise. Everyone's sort of trying to, figure out whether or not this is technology that they can leverage, like how can I use this, right, to gain an advantage or to innovate in other ways. But then also, how do I do that and protect my data, right? How can we ensure that that my data is private? And one of the challenges with that is, of course, since ChatGPT was our initial introduction to generative AI, people tend to think of that application as the only way or the behavior that they'll see across all services of that kind. But there are absolutely others, right, that we, like our Bedrock service and others, that behave differently. But that was their opening to this, their sort of entry gate, and customers are excited, thinking about how I can use it, what ways, but then we also have to think about how do I protect and ensure that the outcome is one we ultimately want and can maintain.
And it's not just how do I protect my data that applies both to corporation and individuals, but it's also how do I make sure that I, as an individual, can take advantage and I'm not left out, right? If you're thinking about the digital divide becoming the AI divide in some ways, and I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's a great point. In some earlier conversations, we were talking about the future of work and trying to sort of understand, right, what do we all need as skills, or what do we as individuals need to be thinking about in order to make sure that we maintain a sort of competitive, right, like what should we be doing? And I think that people have to be thinking about, like, how can I leverage this technology? Because I think that will actually be a little bit of the difference for those that will last, right, and continue to be competitive, versus those that will get left behind. Like, how can I embrace the technology with all that I am as a human being as well, and the unique skill that I have, and make that valuable in different areas of industry.
And have the technology complement my skills and enhance my my reach. For somebody who's not technical, but that, like you and I, belong in different ways to an underrepresented category. How do you explain algorithmic bias?
Yeah, so simply it is, an algorithm, a system, right, that produces a result that is not fair, right, that doesn't have the same sort of outcome or output across any underrepresented group or any sort of demographic or subgroup that we might categorize. And that could be gender, that could be age, right? That could be differing ability or sexual orientation, right? Ethnicity. It can be schools, right? Like education and socioeconomic status, right? All of those are factors or subgroups that we might want to, test for and understand to make sure that the results across all of those, groups of concern are fairly equal, right? That we're getting the same kind of performance, and so that's essentially how I would define.
And a lot of it is based, to your point, on the data that we have available, right? So it's making sure that the data that we use to train a model is representative.
Yeah, so there was a study that Gartner did back, I want to say it's either 2018 or 2019. I've been using this so much, I probably should remember now, but they said that at the time, 85% of, they were predicting that 85% of AI projects would return erroneous outcomes due to the data, due to bias in the data and the algorithms and then the people themselves. Yeah. So it's not just the data, right? It's also that we as individuals have biases.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we might be, crafting or designing or reviewing like the results with a certain lens or a certain perspective. We may have set up our objective function in a way that is biased because of our experiences. And so when we look at this from an system perspective, we have to think about like the things that we do from a technology end to be able to detect and show that, but also the things that we do to help us as individuals, right? Make sure that our individual biases are not influencing or impacting the system as well as, doing things to make sure that we have representative data, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and that's why diversity in AI is so critical and something that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
But I always point people to, we keep on asking the question about bias in AI. But before we get there and worry about that, we should worry about the world we live in, right? Because that's how we solve part of it, right?
But in some ways, that's harder, right? Because we've all known about the biases that we all have and the impact that has on society and individuals.
Yeah.
And perhaps there's less impetus to change or make adjustments for that. So maybe we can contain it in systems with certain approaches where we can't.
I like that.
With people, or it's taking us a little longer.
Yeah.
With people.
Yes. You mentioned governments and individuals before, so that, when it comes to ethical AI, is an effort that needs to be kind of across the board. And obviously, Amazon has invested in safe and transparent, responsible generative AI for years, and from AI perspective, and now generative AI. And you have endorsed the White House Voluntary AI Commitment and also work with the AI Safety Summit in the UK. What do you think the role of the government is? Because right now we're a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, well, I think that, as mentioned, they have a place too, and I think it is to establish guardrails, right? Right now, we're leaving it up to the good of individual corporations, technology providers, other businesses, to make sure that they're going to build safe systems, and not everyone is implementing responsible AI practices. As I mentioned, the study said 25% of them have. While there is an understanding, not everyone is doing that. So I think the guardrails that government and legislation can play or provide is essential as well, right? To make sure that we also, like everyone is hopefully, tracking in the same direction.
But I have to say, I'm kind of happy that organizations like AWS get involved with this and not leave it to the government, because they haven't shown over the years to have a best understanding of technology and what technology can do, right? You're the expert.
So, but that's why the partnership, right, with industry is essential. So I had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago to spend some time with congressional leaders and staffers, on the West Coast, right? And to be able to have a very frank conversation with them about the way in which they're looking at legislation or understanding how they might approach it. And for them, it mattered that, there were technologists and others that are thinking about this and in this world every day, help them unpack and consider, how they might look at the technology, and in some cases, what is realistic for them to implement. So that partnership, right, is essential, because we didn't vote in our legislators for to be technology specialists.
No, it's not their job. Yeah.
Right. So the idea is that we need to complement and be partnered with them along that journey. Academia as well, those in research, right, all need to be a part of that.
And I think what maybe for some people is still unclear is the fact that there's no retrofitting ethics and responsible AI, right? It is not something that in an easy way, once you have developed a model, you can go back and fix, because you kind of lose track of, like, that's what generative AI does, right? It's a model that is in a way self-sufficient, self-learning, so you lose track of where exactly you need to go and fix something.
Well, I think, there is retrofitting. There is a possibility of being able to go back, but I think the question really is, what harm have we done in the interim?
In the interim,
right?
yes.
So ideally, what we want to be able to do is to test, right, in environments. And one of the things that we often recommend is for companies to look at or consider low-risk use cases as some of their first ones, in particular in generative AI or use cases internal to the organization, right, before they unleash, their technology, to the public, because those are much more contained and controlled environments. So when I, start off with a pilot internally with my users, I actually have access to them. They have somewhat of a vested interest in our, success and progress, right? If I leverage some of our affinity groups or DE&I leaders internally, they can help lend a voice or provide perspective for perhaps those that we don't have on the team. But those are internal. I can actually reach out and touch them much more easily, right? Get results, have the feedback loop that's necessary. So that testing is important to hopefully circumvent the negative impact and potentially even harm that can occur if we don't do that initially, right?
Yeah.
So it's less that we can't track it. We can find, we can understand, some of where the risk occurs. And sometimes it happens that, now we see this because there was a public exposure, right? Now we're seeing where but it's hard to sort of, what's the
harm
right
is
word?
done and
Right. The harm is done. How do I, pay back the people or address the folks when my algorithm has,
denied a mortgage,
right,
or
undervalue people's homes, right, or denied them for certain access, right? That's hard to. The impact or the effect is already kind of taken its toll. So ideally, we want to get ahead of that, right, and do this much more proactively and intentionally.
I could talk about this forever, but we are almost at time, and as I always run out of time.
I can as well.
I want to circle back and end on trust, because we mentioned this at the very beginning, and I do really believe that, especially for a company like AWS and Amazon overall, you're focused on a customer-first approach. And with that, the build on trust is being critical. But I do think that if there's one technology that I want to make sure I have trust in the company that is deploying is AI. How do we get there? How do we get people to trust both the people that design the technology and the models and then the technology itself?
I think transparency is critical to that, right? So it is the commitments that we as an organization have made and others have made, and in particular to say that we have a strategy around responsible AI. This matters to us, that we're building and integrating responsible AI into the entire life cycle as we build our services and products, that we are, investing in the next generation of diverse leaders, right, and ensuring that we can have the kind of representation that's necessary, that we're being conscious and aware of how we are sourcing our data. Like those things matter, and us being able to have that conversation and show that commitment and then have the results in our product. I think that is, key to us building trust, not just AWS, but any customer, any company, any entity that's looking to leverage AI and or use it in some way. It is, providing that transparency, and the more that we see, right, we can sort of trust the results. Right?
Yeah, I agree. I really appreciate the time today. I always say that the podcast ends now, but the conversation must continue, especially on a topic like this. So where do people find you if they want to engage with you on social media?
I'm on LinkedIn at TEQ, and Instagram as well.
I do not follow on Instagram, so I'm going to go and correct that right now.
Right, well, that's okay. LinkedIn is probably my primary source. I know there are others, but yeah, that's usually the main one.
Thank you so much for your time today. I know you have a busy schedule here at Reinvent.
Thank you for having me.
It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate the insights.
Likewise. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Right.